up with another pastor to see our kids. Aaron, I learned, had started to assault another kid but had been held back by his friends. He was unrepentant, wanting to leave camp. Pulled his stuff together and shoved it into the car. I asked him for a last talk with me before we drove away. We sat on two large rocks in the middle of the woods. Aaron, I asked, is there any voice inside you telling you what you should do? Yes, he nodded. What's the voice telling you? That I should stay and work it out. Can you identify that voice? Yes, he said immediately. It's God. It was a moment I'd waited for. Aaron, I said, do you realize what just happened? You heard God's voice. He spoke to you from within your soul. Forget everything else that's happened. God spoke to you and you were able to recognize him. I will never forget Aaron's dug-in response. Well, I'm still not going to do what God said. I explained to him that that was his choice, but this is what would happen. If he rejected the voice of God coming from deep within and chose to disobey God's guidance, his heart would become hardened and his ears would become dull. If he continued on this path, there would be a day when he would never again hear the voice of God. There would come a day when he would deny that God even speaks or has ever spoken to him. But if he treasures God's voice, however it comes to him, through the scriptures, through his conscience, whatever, and he responds to him with obedience, then his heart would be softened and his ears would always be able to hear the whisper of God into his soul. Aaron chose to stay, I'm grateful to say. If he had chosen differently, he would have begun the path toward nominal discipleship. Perhaps he never would have rejected the faith overtly. He might have even chosen to be a faithful attendee at a church and been, by everyone else's estimation, a good man. But here's the kicker. He would no longer be a close Jesus follower. He would no longer be a close Jesus follower, and that's the key. That story, friends, is fascinating, and it's true. It's very true. There's nothing more precious than us to be close Jesus followers and to hear the voice of God, rather than just faithful church attendees. And I wrote this down as I was thinking about it. Here's the difference. Jesus followers leave church and make a difference in the world. Good church attendees leave church and let the world make a difference in them. That's good, isn't it? I'm kind of proud of it. One more time. Jesus followers leave church and make a difference in the world. Good church attendees leave church and let the world make a difference in them. And I think the difference is this. It's learning to discern God's voice, learning to hear God's voice, and to willingly follow God's voice. You know, it takes faith to do that. It's not an easy thing to do. It takes faith to do it. One preacher put it this way. He said, this morning, I'm going to speak on the relationship between fact and faith. It is a fact that you are sitting here in the sanctuary, and it is also a fact that I'm standing here speaking. But it is faith that makes me believe that you might actually be listening to what I have to say. I think a lot of times that's true. Now this morning we have a very long text of scripture. And so I asked Pam and Terry to come up and read it because I thought that they could do a much better job than I can do. I think we have it on the screen so you guys will be able to follow it on the screen. But Pam and Terry are going to come up and read for us this morning.
Now the boy Samuel ministered to the Lord before Eli, and the word of the Lord was rare in those days. There was no widespread revelation. And it came to pass at that time, while Eli was lying down in his place, and when his eyes had begun to grow so dim that he could not see, and before the lamp of God went out in the tabernacle of the Lord where the ark of God was, and while Samuel was lying down, that the Lord called Samuel, and he answered,
"Here I am."
So he ran to Eli and said,
"Here I am, for you called me."
And he said,
"I did not call. Lie down again."
And he went and lay down. Then the Lord called yet again,
"Samuel."
So Samuel arose and went to Eli and said,
"Here I am, for you called me."
He answered.
I did not call you, my son. Lie down again.
Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord, nor was the word of the Lord yet revealed to him. And the Lord called Samuel again the third time. So he arose and went to Eli and said,
Here I am, for you did call me.
Then Eli perceived that the Lord had called the boy. Therefore Eli said to Samuel,
Go lie down, and it shall be, if he calls you, that you must say, Speak, Lord, for your servant hears.
So Samuel went and lay down in his place. Now the Lord came and stood and called as at other times.
Samuel, Samuel,
And Samuel answered.
speak, for your servant hears.
Then the Lord said to Samuel,
Behold, I will do something in Israel at which both ears of everyone who hears will tingle. In that day I will perform again, Eli, all that I have spoken concerning his house from beginning to end. For I have told him that I will judge his house forever for the iniquity which he knows, because his sons made themselves vile, and he did not restrain them. And therefore I have sworn to the house of Eli that the iniquity of Eli's house shall not be atoned for by sacrifice or for offering forever.
So Samuel lay down until morning and opened the doors of the house of the Lord. And Samuel was afraid to tell Eli the vision. Then Eli called Samuel and said,
Samuel, my son.
He answered.
Here I am.
And he said,
What is the word that the Lord spoke to you? Please do not hide it from me. God do so to you, and more also, if you hide anything from me of all the things that he said unto you.
Then Samuel told him everything and hid nothing from him. And he said,
It is the Lord. Let him do what seems good to him.
So Samuel grew, and the Lord was with him, and let none of his words fall to the ground. And all Israel from Dan to Beersheba knew that Samuel had been established as a prophet of the Lord.
Very, very good story there, and I wanted you guys to hear it all. And if you get a chance, you can go back in your scripture and reread it. It's a very good story. You can just kind of slowly read it, and you'll get a lot out of it. So, we're going to look at the whisper again, as we did last week. And today we're going to look at to answer the whisper. So that's what we're going to talk about, to answer the whisper of God. The first thing in your notes is this: put God on your daily calendar. This is our instruction this week. Put God on your daily calendar. And that's 1 Samuel 3, verse 1. Now the boy Samuel ministered to the Lord before Eli. Now what I want you to notice, if you were here last week, you're going to notice there are a lot of similarities between last week's message that we talked about how Elijah heard from God, and this week's message that we're going to talk about how Samuel hears from God. And we talked about this last week, and daily time with God is very, very important. I don't know if I put this in your notes, but here's a little saying: the secret of your future is hidden in your daily routine. Read that to you one more time. The secret of your future is hidden in your daily routine. It makes for a great point. Elijah heard from God in a certain way. Samuel hears from God in much the same way. And we can follow their example and hear the whisper just like they did. What's our verse this week? Psalm 46:10 says what? One more time. Very good. We know that we're to be still. And one way to be still is put time aside for God on a daily basis. Just to have a little bit of time that we can dedicate to God. Samuel did much the same thing. He ministered to the Lord. He set time aside on a daily basis. Now, once we do that, we have to move into our regular schedule. So let me kind of give you just a little overview of a